Those of you who know me know that I have three brothers. I am the second of four children given by God to my parents. My older brother was built more like my father, while the other three were built more like my mom. He was a Tennessee State Championship wrestler. And he would come home and practice his moves, whether it be the pretzel hold or the half Nelson, on me because I was the one in close proximity. And I don't know how many times he would get me all tied up and I'd have nowhere to go. And then inevitably, he would look at me and say words that a younger brother hates hearing: if you stop wrestling, if you stop struggling, I'll let you go. But you don't want to do that, because by doing that means that you're giving up. It means that you're admitting that you're not really in control, and that's just hard to do. Now, let me just say straight up here, there are many who are listening to this message all around the world who are wrestling with God and have been their entire lives. All along, you've believed that your problem was your brother or your sister or your mom or your dad or the family in which you were raised, or a coach or a teacher or a boss or a lover or a spouse, or maybe some event that occurred in your life you truly believe ruined your life. You've always believed that if they or this or that had not existed, that you would get all of those things that you feel you're entitled to. Now, this isn't just for those who've experienced trauma. This is for everybody, because most of us truly believed that we have been wrestling all of our lives with our arch enemy, and somehow this thing, this person, this situation is the thing that has stood in the way of us being everything that God meant us to be and achieving everything we were meant to achieve. And we believe that if we can truly face this enemy and defeat it, whatever it is, if we can annihilate the problem in our lives, if we could just remove the barrier, then everything's fine. I want to give you an opportunity this weekend to have a good look at that belief system and to open your eyes to what the real problem in our lives really is, and then to push the reset button and start again. And there is perhaps no better example of this very thing in anywhere in Scripture than in the life of Jacob in the Old Testament. So Jacob in Genesis chapter 32 comes to a climactic point in his life. And let me read, this is how it goes. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overcome him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." This is the point in Jacob's life where he recognizes what his real problem is, and that he's been wrong all of his life, and he's going to push the reset button, and it will change his basic fundamental strategy concerning the way he's going to live his life. Now, to understand the context, what's happening here in Jacob in this situation, you have to really understand that Jacob's story started with his grandfather Abraham. You know Jacob, so grandfather Abraham, father Isaac, and then Jacob comes along. The story begins really when God comes to Abraham and says, "I'm going to bless your descendants. They're going to be as numerous as the sand in the sea and the stars in the sky. I'm going to progress your name. I'm going to increase your possessions. I'm going to expand and prosper everything around you. But you have to leave the home you presently dwell in and go to a land or a country I will show you." And so Abraham obeys God, does exactly that. He's waiting for 20 years for this promise to come true. He still doesn't have an heir. And it's very difficult to have thousands of descendants if you don't yet have one. Sarah, his wife, is getting older by the day. And Abraham comes to a junction in his life where he decides that he's actually going to take matters into his own hands. He actually sleeps with his concubine Hagar. He wants to help God along a little bit. He says, "God made me a promise that my descendants would multiply exponentially, but I don't have an heir. Sarah, my wife, is barren, so I'll just take matters into my own hands so that I can help God give me the blessing that He promised me all along." God rebukes Abraham, and according to his promise, eventually does give Abraham and Sarah a son in their old age. His name is Isaac. Now, Isaac becomes the son of promise through whom the Messiah will come. Isaac grows up, he becomes a man, marries Rebekah. God reminds Isaac, you are the son of promise, and now you are going to bear a son, and he's going to become the son of promise. Isaac's wife Rebekah bears twins, Jacob and Esau. Esau emerges first from the womb, which means he's the firstborn son, and Jacob, grabbing hold of Esau's heel and attempts, metaphorically I guess, to pull him back into the womb so that he can be the firstborn. And then God comes to Isaac and actually says something that would have greatly disturbed Isaac. He said, the older is going to actually serve the younger. The reason that's a big problem is Esau, Jacob, Isaac, just as Abraham before them, lived in a culture of primogeniture. Primogeniture is where the firstborn gets everything. They did not divide their land equally among the offspring. They believed in the principle that we still enunciate today, that it takes money to make money. So they would give all their money, all their resources to the firstborn so that he would have the money to make money, expand the family name, expand the property and land and possessions. Now, the problem is that the Bible tells us that Esau was favored by Isaac. Esau was a kind of an outdoor man. He loved to hunt and gather. And evidently Isaac was the same way. While Jacob, on the other hand, was experienced in culinary delights. He was like his mother. He liked to remain in the tent. He liked to cook and prepare meals. So Esau is loved by his father Isaac. He's a hunter-gatherer. He drives a 4x4, listening to country music with a rifle in the back and deer hide in the front. He's a man's man. So Isaac takes a look at Esau and naturally thinks that he should be the firstborn, that he should be the one who receives rather the firstborn blessings. God comes along and says, no, I've decided it will be Jacob, which will be against every cultural norm of which Isaac will be familiar. So from the very beginning, Isaac doesn't like the choice that God has made. So he ignores it. He repeats the sin of his father Abraham. Instead of trusting in the promises of God, he takes things into his own hands. Even though Isaac was clearly told that Jacob would be the one, he hides behind cultural practices, blocks it out of his mind to the degree that when Isaac is old and it's time for the firstborn blessing, he actually sins for Esau rather than Jacob in direct disobedience to what God had told him about his two sons. But Rebekah, Isaac's wife, devises a plan with the help of Jacob. And I got to tell you, many of you will be familiar with the story. And as I read the story this week, I started to look at Rebekah differently because in the beginning I thought, why would Rebekah go against the wishes and desires of Isaac, the patriarch, the father? And then I started thinking, it could be because, like many wives, she was trying to prevent her husband from doing something stupid. She wouldn't be the first, and she's definitely not going to be the last. And so she concocts a plan to deceive Isaac. Isaac is older. His sight is waning. He doesn't have the senses that he had when he was a younger man. And so Rebekah puts goat hair on the arms of Jacob and his shoulders and makes him smell like the outdoors because the Bible tells us that Esau was hairy and that he was a hunter-gatherer. Jacob goes into the tent. Isaac thinks it's Esau by touch and smell and gives Jacob the firstborn blessing. Now, the other problem in this scenario is Jacob believes that he has the right to the firstborn blessing because he's heard the prophecy. So in his mind, Esau is his enemy and is standing in the way of everything he's entitled to because of the blessing, because of the prophecy. So in his mind, again, Esau is his enemy. And Jacob constantly tries to undermine Esau, wrestle with Esau, strive against Esau to take possession of what he thinks is rightfully his. In fact, there's a story in the Old Testament where Esau's been out hunting and gathering for days, and he's famished, he's not eaten, how many days we don't know. He comes out of the wilderness, and Jacob is there, and he's made a beautiful bowl of beef stew. And Jacob says to Esau, would you like something to eat? Knowing that Esau is near death, Esau says, yes, please. And Jacob says, well, give me your birthright and I'll give you the stew. And of course, Esau thinks, well, what good is a birthright if I'm dead? So he takes the stew. And Jacob thinks that somehow he's manipulated the situation and the firstborn blessing will come to him sooner. In his mind, all of his life, Esau's his enemy. Together with his mother then, they go in and deceive Isaac, just as Abraham, his grandfather, had taken matters into his own hands. Jacob ends up doing the same thing. Now, I cannot emphasize to you enough, if we're going to really understand this principle, how Jacob grew up despising Esau, resenting Esau, playing over and over again in his mind was, if I want to get what God has promised me, I'm going to have to wrestle for it. I'm going to have to wrestle it away from Esau. I'm the one. I got to get what's rightfully mine. So, ironically, after the deed is done, Jacob deceives Isaac. Esau comes into the tent expecting to receive the firstborn blessing. And of course, the first thing Isaac thinks is, well, who did I just bless? Esau becomes furious when he learns that his father Isaac has given the firstborn blessing to Jacob because Jacob, with the help of Rebekah, they have deceived him. The problem again with Esau is he sees all this as superstition because he looks to his father and says, well, what difference does it make that you blessed Jacob? Just bless me now. Say the magic words, that's all that really matters. And the Bible tells us at that moment, Isaac, the father, begins to tremble. And he's not trembling because he's angry. He's trembling because his eyes have been opened. Suddenly he realizes he's not been fighting against Jacob. He's been fighting against God. In one fell swoop, Isaac realizes that God is communicating something to him. Isaac, you've been fighting me and my sovereign choice, but my sovereign choice will be upheld even if you try to circumvent the process. So Isaac is trembling because he's repenting. And Isaac hears his son Esau, his favorite son, say, Father, what does it matter? Bless me. And Isaac says, I'm sorry, son. I have blessed your brother Jacob, and yes, indeed, he will be blessed. It is the sovereign choice of God. So Jacob succeeds, but he has no real practical outcome in his life. He's still depressed. He's still despondent. He's still struggling. He's still wrestling. Nothing really changes because he truly believes that his real problem is Esau and that Esau stands in the way between Jacob and his ultimate destiny, his hope and his future. Jacob says in his mind, I am the one. I am the leader. I am the messianic child, the chosen one. This is my destiny, and I've got to help God give it to me. Now you think about how ridiculous that is. So part of the wrestling means that because Jacob took matters into his own hands, his life is disintegrating. He runs away from the very land he's wanting to inherit because his brother Esau is trying to kill him. He leaves his father with a broken heart, his mother, the only woman who's ever really loved him. He leaves his people. He's now estranged from his people, restricted from his land and culture and family. And I'm sure in his mind, he's thinking, if I'm winning this wrestling match, why does it feel that my shoulders are on the mat and someone's counting to 10? Now, as he's running away, God meets him in the desert. And you'll remember the story called Jacob's Ladder. And in Jacob's Ladder, God appears to Jacob from above, seeking relationship. God is trying to communicate to Jacob, your life is not about this promise. Your life is about me. And in the same way that Abraham and Isaac came to know me, Jacob, the pursuit of your life is not this firstborn blessing. The pursuit of your life is me. But do you know what Jacob does when he meets God? He has the audacity to say this to God. He says, well, God, if you will be with me and give me food and protection, and if you will help me finally get home to my land and my people safely, then I will make you the Lord my God. Wow. Really? He says, God, if you will do what I want in the way that I want it, then I will make you the Lord my God. I will serve you. Now there's another irony here. One of my favorite books, one of my favorite authors is an author by the name of Philip Yancey. And he writes a book. He's written numerous books, prolific writer, but he's written a book called Rumors of Another World. And he describes climbing the mountain behind his home in Colorado. He says he loves climbing mountains. And part of the reason he loves to climb these mountains is because as he sets out on the journey to tackle this mountain that is very close to his home, he says when you climb mountains, it presents a continual shifting point of view. He says, when I first start to climb, there is this sheer wall of granite that are thousands of feet high. But as I get closer, what I thought to be a wall that is impenetrable, now suddenly a thin path emerges, following the seams around to make the climb rather easy. It's a comfortable journey through and around what previously seemed insurmountable. He says, then as the path zigs and zags, the view changes below. First, I see the beautiful aspen trees. And then on the other side, as I make my way around the mountain, I see that the aspens actually circle an alpine lake. And then I see that the lake and forest nestle into a lush valley dotted with lakes and meadows and other groves of trees. And then later on in that same valley, I see that it fits into a cut on the side of the mountain. And then as I climb higher and higher, I see that there are streams of water spilling from its lakes, tumbling down several thousand feet to feed a river that runs through a canyon near my home, 20 miles away. And then he finishes that segment by saying this: only when I reach the summit does the entire landscape fit together. Until then, any conclusion I might draw would prove mistaken. Do you understand the illustration? The events that come into your life are clouded by the reality that you have not yet reached the pinnacle. You have no idea how the events in your life, good or bad, are related to the ultimate goal and calling on your life. The real issue, if we're honest, is we don't trust God. We don't trust that the pinnacle exists. We don't trust that these roads lead in our lives to anything of value. We don't trust that there is a vantage point ahead that will show us how God has used all the events in our lives to get us to the most captivating scene of our lives. What Jacob is saying is, God, I don't know why my life is going like this. I'm the one. I'm supposed to inherit the land, but everything's going wrong. Now, never mind that Jacob is reaping what he's sowing. That's another sermon completely. This is something I will never understand in all my years of ministry. I don't understand it in others, and I rarely understand it in myself. Just one example, I knew a woman who married a man against the direct advice of her spirit-led father. Her father said to her, if you marry this man, you will not be able to pursue the things you want to pursue. You want to be involved in ministry. If you marry this man, your life will not be involved in ministry. You've wanted to be the wife of a preacher of the good news of the gospel. If you marry this man, that's not what your life is going to end up being like. And she goes against the advice of a father. The husband that she marries becomes distant rather quickly and consumed with money. She then becomes an enabler of her own children's behavior because they're rebelling because of an absent father who should have loved them. She tries desperately, as best she knows how, to hold the family together and to maintain the illusion of unity. I say illusion because she did not want her father to have the last word. She wanted to prove her father wrong. So she maintains this illusion, this deception. But ultimately, everything catches up to her. Her kids leave God, become atheists. Her husband leaves her, and she leaves God. And the reason she leaves God for a season is because in her mind, God did not deliver. How we forget that the blessings of God are tied to the precepts of God, that there is life in the law. In Jacob's case, he looks at the issues of his life and he says, there's no way these problems can be part of my future. And he says to God, when are you going to straighten all this out and fix my life? When are you going to sovereignly intervene and make my life go the way it's supposed to be going? God, I will serve you, but you got to help me first. You got me into this mess. You gave me this father. You gave me this mother. You gave me this brother. Now fix it. And Jacob continues his journey. And after meeting God and responding very poorly, I might add, he goes off to live in another land. And to show you the grace and mercy of God, God prospers him anyway. And now he returns to his land. He's going to go back home now in hopes. Years have passed of getting his land back and his family. But Jacob is a chronic wrestler. There's nothing about him that trusts the provision and the sovereign God. You know, I remember growing up in Tennessee, and I hated working in the gardens in the summer. My 3 brothers and I, we had to work in the garden because it's the way we survived. We got our food from what we had planted. But I hated to work in the hot summer, 90 degrees with 90% humidity. And inevitably, my father would walk over to me as I was seated on the front porch drinking iced tea, and he would say, "Son, we can either do this the easy way or the hard way, but make no mistake, you're going to be working in the garden today." You kind of feel like God is saying this to Jacob, and I think he says it to us. We can do this the easy way or the hard way, but I have promised you something, and I will deliver one way or the other. And so Jacob begins his journey home. He's ready to wrestle some more. He's a chronic wrestler. It's like high noon at the OK Corral. Esau's the only thing standing between Jacob and the things he feels he's entitled to. There's going to be a showdown in the desert. Jacob says to himself, if I want my people, my family, and the land, I got to go face the one person who's been the main problem all my life. I've got to appease, flatter, or at least defang Esau, but I got to do something. And so you come to chapter 22, the passage we read earlier. Jacob has become the master manipulator. He's calculating, he's measured, he's totally non-spontaneous. He's got everything figured out, and as he prepares to meet Esau in hopes of reconciling so that he can take back what he thinks he's entitled to, he does 2 things. The first thing is he divides his family and goods up into 2 sections. Verse 7 of chapter 32 says, he thought, that is Jacob, if Esau comes and attacks one group, the group that is left may escape. So he says, I don't know what Esau is going to do. And so I'll divide my family into 2 sections. So if he destroys one, annihilates one, my name will still go on. He does a second thing that's quite amazing. He collects 200 goats, another 200 male and female goats, and camels, and calves, and donkeys. And he divides all of his possessions with all of his servants into 7 groups. And he sends each group out with space in between the group that is to come. And in verse 17 we're told, he instructed the one in the lead group. He says, say to Esau, when my brother Esau meets you and says, who do you belong to and where you're going and who owns all these animals? Say to him then, they belong to your servant Jacob. Notice how he says, your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau. So he says, they are a gift from your servant. Jacob refers to you as Lord and Master, and he is coming behind all of these gifts. You think about the story that's developing here. It's quite amazing. It's raining down gifts, substantial gifts. There's an endowment here. And Esau hears the terms of humility. Your servant Jacob. He senses respect and honor coming from his brother. And it's meant to mellow him, to soften his heart, that he might not want to kill Jacob anymore. And maybe there could be reconciliation, but make no mistake about it, Jacob's still wrestling, and he doesn't trust Esau farther than he could throw him. He's trying to manipulate the situation. And then the Bible says that night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So, Jacob sends the last of everything he owns toward Esau and remains behind by himself. And he's probably saying something like this, you know what? I know I'm in a vulnerable position now. I know I'm at Esau's mercy. But I am so tired of running and fighting. I've been wrestling all my life. And one way or another, I'm going to meet this guy, this man who's been the main problem of my life, one-on-one. And I'm going to get my life back. Right here, right now, I'm going to meet my arch enemy. And ironically, Jacob does. In verse 24, so Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Jacob is suddenly alone. All of his possessions into the darkness. He thinks he's alone, but suddenly he's attacked from behind. Verse 25 says, when the man saw that he could not overpower him, this is Jacob's attacker, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Man, have you ever dislocated a finger? Even a little finger is excruciating. Or a shoulder, much less a larger portion of your body, a hip socket. The Bible tells us that these two men wrestled all night and that no one could gain an advantage over the other. Now, that tells us one thing. If you're wrestling all night, it means that you're pretty equally matched, so that no one's getting an advantage over the other. You're becoming more and more weary, but no one overcomes someone else. And then in verse 26, we're told that the man who's attacked Jacob says, let me go now, Jacob, for it is daybreak. Now, why would the man say, let me go because it's daybreak? Because you and I know the rest of the story. Jacob is wrestling with God. And no man can see the face of God and live. The sun's about to come up. The face of God will be illuminated. And at that point, Jacob refuses to let go. So the Bible tells us that God touched the socket of Jacob's hip. And at that moment, Jacob is rendered helpless. But can you imagine how terrified he would have been? You think he would have said to God, you could have killed me a long time ago. Who are you? You voluntarily restricted your own strength and power. You restrained yourself. We're not equals. This is self-limitation. And then as soon as Jacob feels the power go into him, he realizes who this really is. But think about this. He refuses to let go. I mean, my goodness, I would have run for my life. But he grabs on even tighter. So that God looks to Jacob and says to him, why are you still holding on? And Jacob's response is classic. He says, because I want you. I want your name and I want your blessing. In one moment, Jacob changed his strategy toward God. Before, he was trying to wrestle with God, to control God, to manipulate God for his purposes, to usurp God's authority, to take the place of God on the throne of God. Esau was the one who had messed everything up in Jacob's mind, and suddenly it dawned on Jacob. He's not been wrestling with Esau all of his life, nor his father Isaac. He's been wrestling with God. He finally did meet the one with whom he had been wrestling all of his life. His real problem was never Esau. His real problem, he's been angry at God. Why did you give me this father? Why did you make me cheat like this to get my birthright? And why did it all blow up in my face when I tried to take control? And Jacob suddenly realizes, I didn't have to lie. I didn't have to deceive. I didn't have to manipulate. I've been fighting against one all my life with this kind of power. This God could have blessed me in any and through any circumstance. Nothing would be too difficult for this opponent. This is the God who is able. And he turns around and he ceases to fight against God and begins to fight for God. Not for in the sense of on God's team or on behalf of God, but for the prize of receiving, acknowledging, and being in the full presence of God. Jacob says, I'll tell you why I don't want to let go, because I want to see your face. When God says it's daybreak, you have to let me go. Jacob says, I don't want to let you go. God says it'll be overpowering. You may die. He said it'll be worth it. I want you to bless me. I want your name. I want to see your face. God says to Jacob, you're angry with me because I've not given you what you wanted, but you've not wanted the right things. My face, my nearness, my presence, my sovereignty. And Jacob begins to tremble, just like his father Isaac, just like his grandfather Abraham when they took matters into their own hands. And Jacob, like Isaac, like Abraham, repents and ceases to struggle with God and begins to struggle for God, so much that his grandfather Abraham was actually called the friend of God. And the Bible says that Jacob names that place Peniel, which means I have seen the face of God and was spared. Now let's take a deep breath. We've got a few minutes left. Can I ask you something? Is it not true that you've been fighting against God all your life? Can you be honest enough to admit Your marriage failed, you blame God. Your children walked away from God, you blame God. Your life did not turn out the way you think it should, you blame God. You've not received all the things you think you're entitled to, and God hasn't played his part, so it must be his fault. Can you just admit for just a moment that your real problem is you don't trust God? Can you just be honest and admit that the biggest mistake you've made is in trying to manipulate, control, and calculate the manner in which you could force your life to turn out the way that you want it to turn out. And God, because he has not played his part and done what you think he should have done, when he should have done it, in the manner he should have done it, you don't trust him. So you took matters into your own hands. And all your life, you've been wrestling not against your brother, your sister, some situation, some traumatic event. You've been wrestling with God. You don't like his plan, his ways, nor his timing. And you think all this language about God working everything together for good is just nothing more than theological platitudes. Think about what Jacob said. If God will be with me and give me food and protection, and if he will help me finally get home to my land and people safely, I will make him the Lord my God. Wow! Can you just admit that your love and service to God is contingent upon God behaving the way you think he should behave? Do you see the valuable lessons in the life of Jacob that should catalyze us toward a reset moment where we start to see everything in our life from a different perspective? Lesson 1, the real problem in your life is not what you think. It never is. It's not your brother, your sister, your parents, your coach, your teacher, your ex-husband, your ex-wife. The real problem is twofold. You're angry with God because you think you know better than God how your life should be going to get you to the pinnacles of your life. And 2, your God is far too small. You don't really trust that God can build a winding road that leads to the pinnacles and the greatest view of life and living. So you wrestle your entire life with your perceived enemies when in reality you're fighting against God. You're trying to receive the blessings of God, but he's already promised them to you. But you're trying to use your own means and own manipulation to receive what God has already committed to give you. The real problem is you don't trust God. You don't want to depend upon his judgments and decisions concerning how your life should be going. Your God is too weak and too small. You don't trust his directions. You don't trust his ability to turn a disadvantage into an advantage and use it not only for his glory, but your good. I don't know of another truth that is more applicable to this generation. I don't. So you're a business owner, and you say, I want God's blessings. But God has to understand that you cannot get ahead with the way he instructs you to get ahead. You've got to oversell. You've got to manipulate. You've got to tell little white lies. You've got to cut legal corners. You've got to cheat on your taxes. You've got to slander the competition and all these other things. Your real problem, though, if you're honest, is you don't trust God to prosper you by his precepts, so you take things into your own hands. You came from an abusive family. You're so angry at God because you say, God, you gave me this family. You gave me this father. You gave me this sister or brother. And they've ruined my life. But the real problem is you don't trust God. Wait a minute, Jeff, are you saying that God gave me these parents? No, not at all. But nothing prevents you from receiving the blessing of God, not even bad parents. Unless you play the role of a victim all your life. Unless you don't believe that God can take a disadvantage, turn it into an advantage, and give you the desires of your heart. What you need to do is let go of Esau and grab hold of God. Do you see that? Esau has been your excuse far too long for the decisions you have made. You're wrestling with God, not Esau. You don't trust that his word and his promise can deliver you. That's the bottom line. How about sex? Why are so many Christ followers violating the precepts of God in the sanctity of intimacy? Without conviction or shame, mind you. Because you believe that God's law is archaic, that his precepts don't work, that you know better than God how your relationships should go. You believe you know your way is the best way, and so you've been conniving from the beginning, like Jacob. You don't trust God to deliver what it is that you want. You want what you want right now, so you steal and lie and manipulate to get it, and the real problem is you don't trust God. And last week we said that C.S. Lewis says, pursue heaven and get earth thrown in, pursue earth and get neither. Many of you are pursuing earth, and that's why you're so frustrated. Lesson 1, your real problem is that you've been fighting against God all your life. Lesson 2, God almost always has to wound you to show you this. God almost always has to wound you to show you this. In verse 31, we're told that after God had wounded Jacob, that he limped away. Now, do you know, this limp, this wound, is going to go with Jacob for the rest of his life. He's going to carry it till the day he dies. And yet, was the wound not a wound of grace? You say, why grace? And the answer is because God did not give Jacob what he really deserved. God seldom does give us what we deserve. He was a deceiver, a conniver, always leaving carnage in his wake. But what does God do? To wake us up in the course of our lives, he wounds us. And they are much more soft than what we deserve. You know, in the middle of this COVID-19, I got a strange call one day. Most of you know that I struggled for about 2.5 years with anxiety disorder. I won't tell that story again, don't worry. But the psychiatrist that I'd been seeing actually passed away earlier this year. And so Kaiser somehow got wind of that. And I was given a Zoom call by a psychiatrist, a strange thing. And he said, yes, Mr. Vines, I'm calling just to make sure you're okay because a lot of people are really having difficult anxiety during this pandemic, so I'm here for you. Do you need meds? Is there anything you need? And I kept trying to explain to him that no, I'm actually fine, that I've actually been able to conquer this. Well, he wasn't going to have that because in his mind, you don't conquer it. It's something that stays with you, so he can't harmonize what I'm saying with the history of my chart, I guess, that he has in front of him. And he kept asking me again and again, Pastor, are you sure? Are you sure that you don't need some meds? And finally I said, look, you've obviously discovered I'm a pastor. Can I just tell you something? This anxiety disorder, it can be defeated. Somewhere along the road, God kept sending me wounds of grace. And I stopped fighting against God and started fighting for God. And when I got God, I got everything else, including peace. And I had the opportunity, he stayed on the line. I had the opportunity to share with him the wounds of grace, the death of my mom. Did God cause the death of my mom? No, but it was a wound. And God was gracious because he delivered his presence to me, a prevailing presence in the midst of the death of my mom. The same thing in the passing away of my father, both at far too young an age. So there have been times in my life when I have been wounded, but they have been so gracious. And I can tell you that I stand before you, I am limping. They have their mark, but I'm limping with a smile. Are you? Can you name the wounds of grace in your life? Wounds that have been sent to wake you up. Wounds that left a limp, but a limp with a smile. Do you know, Proverbs 27 says, faithful are the wounds of a friend, and there's no greater friend than Jesus. They are the wounds of intervention. Your real problem is that you've been fighting against God all your life. Lesson 2, God always has to wound you to show you this, that you've been wrestling with him, to change your perspective, to change your aim, not manipulating others around you, but manipulating yourself to get into the presence of the living God, that you might respond to the soft touch of his hand, the whisper of his voice, to turn your heart toward home. And lesson 3, your greatest pursuit must be the reality of God. If you're going to reset and things are going to be different, are you willing to say, Lord, take anything away from me that you need to? Do anything you need in my life to wake me up. I've been playing the role of victim far too long. I've been thinking my real enemy was some person, some situation, some traumatic event that happened to me. I realize now that I don't understand all the ins and outs of all these things that have happened, but I do know that I do trust you. You can take what was meant for evil and use it for good. I've seen you do it in my life. I think you can do it again. I want to trust you. I want to trust your sovereign will and power. Can you do that? Can you say to God, God, touch me with a wound of grace if it means that I will recognize the face of God and will want His name and His blessing. You know, my biggest fear in this COVID-19 is that the wound of grace in our lives will be ignored. Think about how God has used this to wake us up. Think about it just for a moment. What has been taken from us? Sports, the American God. Travel, the pursuit of perpetual wonder. Business, the tyranny of the urgent. All of that taken from us. And I wonder, when we return to normality, will the house of God be full? Will we finally realize that only three things remain? The people of God, the house of God, the purposes of God. Jacob would not let go of the God of the universe, and that was quite dangerous. He realized he had a hold of God, and he said, I'm not going to let go. I want God in my arms. That's what I really want, and I want Him to bless me, and I want Him to bless me with His presence, with Himself. It's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that delivers. It's the only thing that lasts. You say, Pastor Jeff, okay, all right. I've been fighting against God. I don't like His plan. I don't like His ways. All right, He has sent wounds of grace into my life, and okay, He must become the ultimate pursuit, but I don't really know how to do that. You never really explain it. And I hear your sermons, Pastor Jeff, but no offense, you don't really help that much. The answer cannot be shortcutted. It's sitting before God in prayer and reading His Word. You say, I do that, Jeff, but I don't feel anything. I can't sense God. Can I say to you, don't let go until you receive a blessing. Don't give up. Maybe God wants you to chase Him, that you may realize how He's chased you. I don't know, but don't give up. Keep reading, keep praying, do the best you can. Say what's on your heart. Even when you don't feel like it, keep doing it. Don't let go of God. Don't let go until He blesses you with His name and His presence. In verse 28, then the man said, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you've struggled with God and won. So Jacob had a wrestling match with God and won and defeated God? No. It meant that you have struggled with God and you have overcome, in the sense that your eyes have been opened, your life has been changed, you have won life's greatest battle. You have recognized that the issue in your life is not others, it's you're not happy with God and His ways and His means in your life. Now, Jacob, you have won by losing. You lost yourself, gained God, and that is the ultimate pursuit of life. Father, I thank You and praise You for the power of Your word, for Your goodness and grace. And I pray right now in Jesus' name, those who are listening will start to see the events of their lives in the past in a different light. In a light of understanding that even though You do not ordain many of the circumstances that we find ourselves in, that we are part and parcel to a fallen world, You still are the God who takes all of those things as if they are winding roads, uses them, carves them into the hillside, keeps pushing us forward through wounds of grace, that we might reach the pinnacle and we might have a perspective and a view that is actually worth dying for. May we die to ourselves that we might gain You. In Christ's name, amen.
Congratulations on finishing another video here at the One and All YouTube channel. I'm so glad we got to experience that together, and I'd love to experience another video with you. So why don't you pick this one right here, this video, or you can subscribe right here. And I'd love it if you were inspired by this video in any way, if you would take the time to hit the like button, comment, and even consider sharing this content with a friend, because chances are if it inspired you, it's going to inspire somebody you know. Let's continue on this journey together and watch another video.